everybody knows what Microsoft is. Everybody knows what a scientist is. What is I think people might be surprised to find out that Microsoft has a chief scientist, and like you're not writing code per se, but what does your day look like? What does that job entail?
Yeah. How many people are surprised Microsoft has a chief scientist? Nobody, right?
Okay.
We do a lot of science, and actually, we've been working through a lot of disruption. My job is essentially to drive research-backed innovation in our core products. And you talked a little bit about XD and the work that he's been doing with the pandemic. We certainly had a really significant shift in how people use our core products with the rapid shift to remote work, and then more recently with AI.
So Microsoft, obviously, AI is not necessarily a new thing, but it's certainly with the advent of ChatGPT, you guys were right there at the beginning with OpenAI, had sort of the inside track there. And the amazing thing is that you were able to deploy, and this is true of a lot of the LLMs that are out there, but you were able to deploy so quickly and just give the tool to users as part of your productivity suite. Can you talk a little bit about just how quickly you rolled that out?
Yeah. No, well, and that's a good connection, Dan, then to my role as chief scientist, part of my job. So Satya and I created this role about 5 years ago. So perhaps maybe more surprising is the fact that we didn't have this role prior to 5 years ago. And we created this because, we saw coming disruption. Products like Word and PowerPoint and Excel, products like Windows, products like SharePoint. These were our big successful products, but had largely saturated the market. And, we sort of, every Fortune 100 company uses our products. They use it to the full extent, and that's great. But Satya was very concerned about, sort of the standard innovator's dilemma and how we move forward from there. And so we created this role of chief scientist to really push on. Actually, so that was my job, was to go and bug everybody who has these big successful products that are making the company all of its money and be like, no, we have to do things differently and figure out how to break things a little bit. The pandemic actually ended up being very helpful for that, in that it created an external disruption for our products where we had to rethink things. AI was a more internal driven disruption, and a lot of the sort of skills that we developed in working through the rapid shift to remote work ended up being very helpful as we thought about the move to AI.
So a lot of your work is research driven. You understand how people work probably better than any other company in the world. What are some of the insights that you learned through your research that you were then able to sort of productize and take advantage of?
Yeah, okay. So you were asking about, so one of the things and so I've been doing AI research for decades. I got my PhD from the MIT AI lab at the turn of the millennium. It's an area I've been thinking about a lot. And the techniques that are used right now with deep learning aren't actually that different from the techniques that we were using 20 or 30 years ago. The big difference is the scale that we're able to operate on, the scale of compute that we're able to work with, the scale of data. All of that has led to some really interesting emergent properties in these large language models. And it's that large word is important. That's where you see some of this interesting emergent behavior. I have to say, AI researchers have been some of the most skeptical people when coming to the current generation of language models, because, I spent my whole life sort of aware of all of the hype surrounding AI and what's going on, and generally having everybody expect the models to be better than they actually were. When we first started working with GPT-4 and sort of the current generation of models, it was the first time where I'm like, oh, people don't know. This model's better than they think. They're not being creative enough or thinking interestingly enough. And then you asked about so we've got this amazing model, and it's just it's one of those, the second you play with it, you can see that it's going to change everything.
What impressed you? Because I think everybody's experimented with it. Everybody's had that feeling, but As a jaded, seasoned professional, what impressed you about it?
Yeah. Well, and make sure everybody thinks they've played with the current generation, but often you're playing with GPT 3.5 or older versions too. Make sure you're playing with the latest version. Probably the most interesting thing is the ability of the model to handle a lot of context, so long conversations and a lot of context, and then and to manage through ambiguity really successfully. A good example is just, if you ask the current generation of model to write a poem, and it can successfully break the rhyming pattern just a little bit when it makes sense and conveys the meaning better. And so I think that ability to sort of manage with ambiguity has been a real win for the models.
Are there things that you use it for in your day-to-day work?
Oh yeah, I use it all the time. Probably, one of the things that's interesting about large language models, and that relates to this ambiguity topic, is how it allows us to interact with our computers, which historically have been very deterministic interactions, right? You click a button and you know exactly what's going to happen when you click on that button. Now all of a sudden you can interact with a computer in a more ambiguous way, with natural language, with sort of all of the depth that is encompassed in that. And so that's the interesting meaty place where I use language models the most. I think sometimes you see people actually make mistakes and think about language models they're like, oh, it's a computer, it's gonna go automate routine stuff for me. And that's not where the strength lies. The strength lies in some of this messiness. So I really like using the model to get different perspectives on content that I write. I have a hard email to send. And I like to be like, oh, how might this person react to this email versus how might this other person react to that email?
It's interesting. And you prompt it with make it more professional, make it more apologetic.
Yeah, although actually, yes, it can help me, but before I even figure out that I want that, I want to know, what are the red flags this email might trigger? How might somebody misinterpret that? And then I can sort of put on tone. So there's a bunch of really interesting things captured in language. And so with this more apologetic, more professional, that's tone and style. That's an interesting piece captured in language. There's obviously a lot of facts and knowledge that are captured in language, but I think sometimes one of the things that's particularly interesting in language is actually process and how things get done, and that's the piece that I get really excited about.
It's fascinating because if you think about the history of the digital revolution in work, Microsoft obviously dominated this interface that was sort of driven based on files and folders and applications, and things were all in their place. We sort of moved to more a search-based model where we find information on the web, we find information on our PC, and we sort of get used to just running searches for anything we want to know. And now we're entering this stage where it's much more conversational, and you're relating to your technology and your data in a different way. And it's just a very different paradigm. How do you think, do people need to be trained on that? Does it come naturally because it's a conversation? What's the gap to help people really relate to their systems in a new way?
Yes, no, so it's a good question. And actually, you talk about search. My PhD is specifically in personalized search and thinking about how people find information. And search is really the first AI application that people interacted with at scale. It is the start of a natural language interaction. It is the start of expressing some ambiguity. And when you look at early search engine use, you actually see people's behavior kind of had to get trained and shaped. Before web search, the primary type of search that people used was library search. And so they were used to entering long Boolean queries. And so the very first queries in web search engines were actually quite long. And that doesn't, or at least didn't, produce particularly good results for search engines at the time. And so people learned to get really, really short and effective with their queries. With large language models, actually, the more you say, the better. And so we're learning to just chat a lot with the model, like have multi-turn conversations, provide additional context, provide documents and other data as context, because just the more information that we give, the better. And so you're seeing changes in behavior. It's an interesting thing that's happening right now, though, is the underlying technology is changing really fast as well. And so it's a real challenge to figure out how to co-evolve sort of human behavior and figuring out how to use this tool with the tool changing as you're using it as well. And it certainly happens that like somebody will try something today and it doesn't work. I mean, this happens to me, and I'm building the products, and like something doesn't work, and like I then won't try it again, even when it starts working. And so actually the process of like helping people understand what's possible and like prompting them, helping people figure out how they can use the tool is really important.
So I think Microsoft lucked out by getting to the term CoPilot before anyone else, because it's just such a friendly approach to, this is going to be your companion, it's going to be there to help you, but you're still flying the plane. So it's a wonderful brand, but like, how have you seen how have you seen the way this technology changes the way people work, the work-life balance? Businesses see this as a way to extract more productivity from their employees. How do employees see it?
So we're doing a ton of research in that space and understanding. I think in many ways, like, yes, we were lucky with the brand, but I think it's also actually really foundationally, like, it is the basis of like decades of how the company has been evolving computing technology and how we understand that. One of the things that I'm sort of most excited about with CoPilot, and this actually relates a little bit to your question about like how do people know what to do or what to ask of CoPilot? And that's hard because it's changing, but when you think about intent, and actually when you think about conversations, like conversations aren't just a one-way thing. I don't typically, like if I'm gonna go sit down and chat with Dan, I'm not like, okay, I wanna get something out of Dan and like, these are the different ways I'm going to manipulate Dan into doing things for me. Instead, I think it's a conversation. So conversations can include a lot of grounding, and that's sort of like where we arrive at a shared understanding and figure things out together. And like we eventually arrive at a shared understanding that we can move forward with, and that's sort of the grounded content or the grounded process. But a lot of this is like the process of grounding. And thus far, that's been very one-directional with language models, where I go sit and tell a language model what I want and try to get things out of it. But I think one of the things that we're doing a lot of work on right now is actually building question asking into the system and thinking about how do you not just help people prompt the machine better, but help the machine prompt people better. And I think that really gets at what you were pushing on with CoPilot, which is like, in many ways, it's how do you prime people? How do you set people up to bring their best self to what they're doing? Like, how do you ask a person interesting question? Be like, ooh, that's a good way to think about things, or I can do something differently now.
There's also, it seems to me, I tend to be relatively transactional with my LLMs. I just want things from them. But there's a sense over time that I'm like, well, you know what? I don't want to have to tell you my name, tell you my job, tell you what my priorities are every time. Yeah. I kind of want you to just remember all those things about me.
Absolutely.
And as those things stack up, you're winding up with a fairly intimate relationship with a software tool that's going to know, that can really, and we'll see this later on today, replicate you and your opinions in a lot of ways. Like, where do you see that going? And does Microsoft want to help enable that, or do you want to be more, this is a business tool, and if you want to have a personal AI, that would be a different product?
Well, the words, personal AI can be many things. But when you think about it, so Microsoft, like nobody knows more about work than Microsoft. We're turning 50 in April. We have just decades of experience in the productivity space. We have been doing research into how computers can support productivity for just about as long. And we know what work is. We know that work is purposeful, that people are trying to get things done. We know that work is persistent and takes place over time. We know that work is collaborative, that really nothing gets done individually. And like, we can take that deep knowledge of what work is and then bring language models to bear and like essentially create a new intent-driven way of thinking about all of those different pieces. And so you were asking with the personalization specifically around persistence. And like, I don't want to have to be telling it the same things, but like actually we have good models for persisting information. You know, Microsoft's a document company. We were sort of founded around creating and sharing documents. That's an amazing model when you start thinking about conversations as a type of document that contains important information that you want to persist and use over time. And then all of that, like those decades of knowledge about like, what does it mean to permission and share content? What does it mean if, you know, somebody leaves the company? What happens to the content that they owned and created? Like, we have precedent and approaches for that. So it actually is, it's almost not a new thing. It's like it's our bread and butter. It's our old thing that we know how to do in the context of this new technology.
Yeah, the interface has changed. You now have a conversational intent-driven interface. All that information may have existed in file cabinets, may have existed on a server or in the cloud, but now you've got a new way of accessing it and surfacing it.
100%. And that's not nothing. Like that, that's meaningful, because then like, what does it mean when the document isn't like a document that we've written together, but the document is our conversation or the knowledge that gets extracted and is reusable from our conversation? And what does it mean actually when those documents aren't just used directly by other people, where like, I'll give you this document so that you can read it and be prepared when we walk into the meeting, but instead is used to actually ground the language model and provide background to the language. So it is both kind of the same things, but also importantly different.
So let me ask you that question. What does it mean? What does it mean for individuals who are using these tools and also businesses that are deploying them that now have this new type of archive? What do things look like in 5 years?
Yeah. It's sort of funny. So researchers, especially, like researchers' job is to figure out what's happening in 5 years. And nobody knows like what's going to happen next week, let alone what's in 5 years. So it's a good question. We do have, so we have a lot. One of the things that's been interesting is our customers have been really interested in, they understand what a big change this is. They don't actually expect us to know the answers up front and are interested in, co-engaging in research. We have probably the largest customer research program ongoing now compared to ever in the past. We went out with CoPilot, and it was like very hard for customers to get early access to CoPilot. This was like a highly curated, just figuring out, because like even early on, it's figuring out capacity and all of that. Like, we're just trying to make this work. A significant portion of our customers who got early access actually decided to randomly allocate the seats, the precious CoPilot seats within their organization, so that we could run randomized controlled trials of
that's so smart.
CoPilot deployment. Yes, it was amazing. And so we can tell, like, with causal certainty, the impact that CoPilot has on people's real world behavior. And so there had been, up until just recently, there had been a number of laboratory-based studies. You might have read some of these. They've both been conducted by Microsoft and external. I think the Jagged Frontiers paper is a great example of that. So in the lab, we had all been seeing, like, yes, CoPilot helps you generate content faster or summarize content better. What we saw through these randomized controlled trials is that those lab-based gains were showing up in the real world in the context of real workflows. So like, people with CoPilot generate 10% more documents than they generate without it. And that's like causal. Like, I can tell you that that's a fact. And like, people read 11% fewer emails with CoPilot.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
I was a little worried about the document thing, but
Well,
cut my email by 10%, I'm in.
And so that's a short term. That's a short term impact. What we're starting to see though is then you see some workflows are better, have more impact, and actually, which is sort of different from the lab based studies. So the lab based studies where you like gave a person a task, you actually saw the low skilled people were the ones who got the most benefit from AI. You know, I don't know how to write a document. You give me CoPilot, it will write a document better. When we look in the real world, you actually start to see the benefit go to some of the more high-skilled contexts, because actually it's the people who are figuring out how to redesign their workflows and think about things differently. And that's exactly what you were getting at, Dan, is you're like, I'm generating more content and I'm reading it more effectively. Like, that's dumb. Like, why are we all just going to create more content to like have AI summarize it for us? And that's like, so in the short term, we are seeing very real, very measurable impact on productivity at a scale that like is unbelievable, that you wouldn't have expected to see anywhere. But like the big thing that's coming forward is that change to workflows, and like how does it foundationally change the way we communicate and collaborate? And so that's what I'm really excited about.
Right. Well, hopefully by the end of the day, we'll have some examples of that to share. Let's give Jamie a big round of hand.
Thank you.